February 5-10, 1943. Dawn breaks over the Russell Islands, 40 miles northwest of Guadalcanal. The morning air hangs thick with salt and gasoline fumes. Through the mist, a young Japanese coastal observer named Corporal Matsuda raises his field glasses toward the anchorage below. What he sees defies comprehension. Dozens of American ships disgorge an endless stream of yellow machinery onto the beach's machines, unlike anything he has witnessed in this war. Bulldozers, graders, cranes, and men. Thousands of men in blue chambray shirts and dungarees, moving with the coordinated intensity of factory workers rather than soldiers. Within his vision, the jungle is already falling. Trees that have stood for centuries topple in minutes. Matsuda lowers his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly. He has been trained to fight infantry. But how does one fight? Construction? This is the story of the most peculiar mismatch in modern warfare. Hardened Japanese defenders who had stopped Marines cold, now facing an enemy that carried wrenches instead of rifles, yet proved utterly unstoppable. It is the story of the United States Navy Construction Battalions, the Seabees, whose industrial miracle in the Pacific theater would redefine what military power could accomplish. And it is the story of how American abundance, ingenuity, and sheer logistical audacity broke not just enemy positions, but enemy understanding of what war itself could be. By early 1943, the Pacific War had become a brutal contest of islands and airfields. Each scrap of coral and volcanic rock represented a potential airbase, and whoever controlled the skies controlled the ocean beneath them. The Japanese had learned this lesson well. From the Solomons to the Gilberts, they had fortified positions with fanatical determination, creating networks of bunkers, artillery positions, and defensive lines that turned every island into a fortress. On Guadalcanal, it had taken the United States Marine Corps 6 months of savage fighting to secure a single airstrip. 6 months. Thousands of casualties. For one airfield, the strategic mathematics was unsustainable. The Pacific Ocean contains over 25,000 islands. Japan held thousands of them. At Guadalcanal's pace, the war would last decades. American planners understood that victory required not just taking islands, but transforming them, converting raw jungle and coral into functioning airbases at a speed that would allow the United States to leapfrog across the Pacific faster than Japan could respond. This demanded something unprecedented, a military force that could build under fire, that could turn strategic vision into concrete and steel faster than the enemy could. Organize resistance, enter the Seabees. They were not supposed to exist. Before December 1941, the United States Navy had relied on civilian contractors for construction projects, men who worked behind secure lines far from combat. But the Pacific changed everything. Civilian workers could not be compelled to stay under bombardment. They could not be ordered to build while enemy snipers fired from tree lines. They had no military discipline, no rank structure, no framework for operating in war zones. After Pearl Harbor, Rear Admiral Ben Morial proposed a radical solution: create military construction battalions composed of skilled tradesmen, carpenters, electricians, heavy equipment operators, engineers, give them weapons training, and send them forward with the assault waves. The Navy approved the concept in January 1942. By March, the first battalions were forming. Their motto, adopted with characteristic pragmatism, was simple: we build, we fight. What made the Seabees different from any military force in history was their average age and experience. While Marine infantrymen averaged 20 years old, Seabees averaged 37. These were men pulled from Depression-era public works projects, from construction sites and lumber mills, from oil fields and steel foundries. They were welders who had built bridges, electricians who had wired skyscrapers, equipment operators who had carved highways through mountains. One battalion commander remarked that his men had more practical engineering knowledge than most Army engineer regiments combined. They were too old for the draft, too skilled for standard infantry, and absolutely perfect for the impossible task ahead. The Japanese defenders expecting them had no framework for understanding what was coming. Traditional warfare operated on certain assumptions. Armies needed supply lines. Fortifications took time to build. Airfields required months of preparation, grading, drainage, compaction, surfacing. A defender with prepared positions, ample ammunition, and determination could hold against superior numbers indefinitely. This was the lesson of Tarawa, of Peleliu, of Iwo Jima. Japanese doctrine emphasized transforming every position into a death trap, making the Americans pay in blood for every yard. On islands like Baguio, Japanese commanders boasted that their defenses could not be taken by 1,000,000 men in 100 years, but the Seabees did not fight for yards. They fought for acres per hour. Consider the Russell Islands operation. Intelligence estimated 5,000 Japanese troops remained on the islands following their evacuation from Guadalcanal, not a massive force, but enough to contest any landing, to make construction impossible under their fire. The Marine Corps prepared for a difficult fight. They landed on February 21, 1943, expecting days or weeks of jungle combat. They found the islands largely abandoned, the Japanese having withdrawn under cover of night. But even abandoned, the Russell Islands were useless without infrastructure. Useless without airfields. The Seabees came ashore 4 hours after the Marines. 4 hours. Standard military doctrine suggested waiting until the island was thoroughly secured, until engineers could survey the terrain, until construction plans could be properly drafted. The Seabees brought their plans with them, prefabricated blueprints that could be adapted to almost any terrain. Within 6 hours of landing, bulldozers were already clearing jungle. Within 12 hours, a main road connected the beaches to the proposed airfield site. Within 3 days, reconnaissance flights were reporting to headquarters that the construction was so rapid they could barely photograph it before the landscape changed. Asterisk. The first airfield on Bonica Island, a fully operational fighter strip with taxiways, revetments, fuel storage, and command facilities was completed in 21 days. 21 days. From virgin jungle to operational airbase. For perspective, civilian construction firms in the continental United States, working with unlimited supplies and no enemy interference, estimated such a project would require 4 to 6 months. The Seabees did it in 3 weeks, working around the clock, often under air raid warnings, with supply ships arriving irregularly on an island where every material and tool had to be brought from thousands of miles away. When Admiral William Halsey flew in to inspect the work on day 18, he reportedly stood silent on the new runway for several minutes, then turned to the Seabee commander and said, "I didn't believe the reports. I thought someone was exaggerating. But this changes everything." What? The Japanese could not comprehend. What would confound them throughout the Pacific campaign was the sheer scale of American industrial capacity translated directly into combat operations. The Seabees did not build airfields the way armies had built them for decades. They built them the way Ford built automobiles, through standardization, prefabrication, and relentless logistical coordination. Steel matting for runways Marston mat arrived in pre-cut sections that interlocked like massive puzzle pieces, eliminating the need for concrete curing times. Quonset huts came as flat-packed kits that 8 men could assemble in a day. Fuel bladders replaced traditional tank farms. Every component was designed for one purpose: speed. Japanese reconnaissance pilots who flew over American construction sites returned with reports their commanders initially dismissed as impossible. One pilot claimed to have photographed the same site 3 times over 6 days, and each time the airfield had doubled in size. Another reported counting over 200 pieces of heavy machinery operating simultaneously on a single island. The numbers seemed absurd. They were accurate. On Los Negros and the Admiralty Islands, Seabees began constructing an airfield while the battle for the island was still raging. Japanese troops held bunkers less than 300 yards from the runway perimeter. Seabee bulldozer operators worked in shifts, with rifle-carrying guards walking beside their machines, ready to shoot snipers who emerged from the jungle. One operator, Seaman First Class Lawrence Meyer from Iowa, was shot through the shoulder by a Japanese rifleman while grading a taxiway. Meyer wrapped his shoulder with his shirt, climbed back into his bulldozer, and finished his shift because, as he later reported, "We were on a timeline, and I wasn't hurt bad enough to miss it." The airfield was operational in 17 days. Marines were still clearing the northern part of the island when the first American fighters landed. This was psychological warfare of an entirely different character. Japanese defenders understood dying. They understood sacrificing positions strategically, falling back to prepared lines, trading space for time. What they could not understand was an enemy that built faster than they could destroy, that responded to setbacks not with retreat, but with more bulldozers. On Emira Island, Japanese artillery managed to crater a partially completed runway in a night bombardment. Seabee repair crews had it filled, graded, and operational again in 11 hours. The Japanese gunners, watching through field glasses at dawn, saw their night's work erased as if it had never existed. The symbolic weight of this abundance was not lost on educated Japanese officers. They had been told that America was weak, decadent, a nation of luxury-softened citizens who would never endure hardship. Yet here were American soldiers who did not fight with rifles, but with tools, who conquered territory not with bayonets, but with concrete and steel, who transformed environments so rapidly it seemed like sorcery. One captured Japanese major, interrogated after the fall of Kwailine, was shown aerial photographs documenting Seabee construction progress. He studied them carefully, then asked his interrogator a question that revealed the depth of his confusion. "Do your commanders punish these men if they work slowly?" The interrogator explained that no, these were volunteers, working normal shifts with breaks for meals. The major fell silent. After several minutes he spoke again. "We were told you had machines. We did not understand that your entire nation is a machine." He had glimpsed something profound. The Seabees represented the industrialization of warfare itself, not just in weapons, but in logistics, in construction, in the very transformation of space. Every island they touched became American, not through conquest alone, but through rebuilding. The jungle was not just cleared. It was paved. The beaches were not just secured. They were turned into ports with piers, warehouses, and fuel depots. The Seabees did not occupy territory. They annexed it to American industrial capacity. By mid-1944. The pace had accelerated beyond anything imagined in 1942, on Tinian. Seabees constructed what would become the busiest airfield in the world, busier than LaGuardia, busier than any airfield in Europe. 6 runways, each over 8,000 feet long, with hard stands for hundreds of B-29 bombers, fuel storage for millions of gallons, maintenance facilities, barracks, hospitals, the complete infrastructure of a major city, all built on an island that 18 months earlier had been Japanese-controlled sugarcane fields. The construction time from first bulldozer to first operational bomber mission, 43 days. 43 days to build the airfield from which the Enola Gay would eventually fly. Japanese commanders, reading intelligence reports of these construction miracles, faced a strategic paradox. Every resource devoted to contesting American landings was a resource that bought less and less time. Defending an island for a month simply meant the Americans would build their airfield in the second month rather than the first. The brutal mathematics of attrition that had favored defenders throughout military history had inverted. Now the defender paid in lives for delays measured in weeks, while the attacker paid in machinery and materials resources America possessed in effectively unlimited quantities. Some Japanese strategists recognized this. After the fall of the Marianas, staff officers in Tokyo circulated internal documents acknowledging that American construction capabilities represented a new form of warfare for which we have no adequate countermeasure. One analysis, captured after the war, noted with fatalistic precision, the American Seabees can build an airfield faster than our Navy can sortie bombers to destroy it. Even if we succeed in clearing their runways, they repair the damage faster than we can plan follow-up attacks. We are fighting an opponent who rebuilds faster than we can destroy. This is not a war of attrition. This is a war of creation, and we cannot win a war of creation against the United States. That document, written in the summer of 1944, was classified most secret within the Japanese military hierarchy. Its conclusions were never widely distributed. Perhaps because they were too demoralizing. Perhaps because they revealed a truth the Japanese high command was unwilling to accept. That they had entered a conflict against an opponent whose fundamental nature they had catastrophically misjudged. The Seabees themselves rarely spoke in grand strategic terms. They were builders by trade and temperament. They measured success in cubic yards of earth moved, in square feet of runway completed, in gallons of fuel stored. But they understood, in practical terms, what their work meant. Every airfield completed ahead of schedule was bomber missions launched weeks earlier. Every fuel depot built meant sorties that would otherwise be impossible. Every day of construction time saved was days subtracted from the war's duration. They were not fighting for territory. They were fighting for time itself, and they were winning. By war's end, the Seabees had constructed over 400 advanced bases across the Pacific. From Alaska to Australia, from the Aleutians to Okinawa. They built ports capable of handling Liberty ships in harbors that had never seen vessels larger than fishing boats. They carved airfields from volcanic rock, from coral atolls, from mountain plateaus. They built hospitals, roads, bridges, communication networks, the complete infrastructure of American power projected across an ocean that covered 1/3 of the Earth's surface. They did this while suffering combat casualties, because unlike any construction force in history, they built under fire. 350 Seabees were killed in action. Thousands more were wounded. They earned battlefield commendations fighting as infantry when bases were overrun. But their primary mission was never combat. Their mission was transformation. That mission proved more devastating to Japanese resistance than many conventional military campaigns. Because every island the Seabees transformed became a permanent base for the next leap forward. Because every airfield meant American fighters and bombers operating from positions previously secure to Japan. Because the cumulative effect of their construction created not a front line but a web, an interconnected network of bases that progressively strangled Japan's ability to defend its empire. The Marines and Army took the islands. The Seabees made them American. Late in the war, an American intelligence officer interviewed an elderly Japanese civilian on Okinawa who had watched both the Japanese military fortify the island and later watch the Americans rebuild it. The translator asked what had surprised him most about the American occupation. The old man thought carefully, then answered, "When the Japanese Army came, they took our tools and made us dig tunnels and bunkers. When the American Navy came, they brought more tools than we knew existed and built roads and buildings so fast we thought they must be using magic. I realized then that a nation that builds so much so fast can never be defeated. Because they do not fear destruction, they know they can simply build again. That is the poetry buried in logistics. The symbolism hidden in steel matting and bulldozers. The Seabees represented an ideal that America's enemies had failed to grasp. That democracy's greatest strength was not philosophical but practical, not rhetorical but material. Free peoples, voluntary labor, industrial abundance, channeled not toward oppression but toward creation, could accomplish miracles that authoritarian discipline and Bushido spirit could never match. The Japanese soldier was prepared to die for his emperor. The Seabee was prepared to build for his country. In the arithmetic of the Pacific War, building proved more powerful than dying. February 5, 10, 1943. Corporal Matsuda watches the Americans build. By nightfall, they have cleared 10 acres. By the end of the week, 20. He and his remaining garrison withdraw to the northern island, knowing they are no longer defending a position. They are merely witnesses to inevitability. 3 weeks later, American fighters take off from the completed airfield, flying north toward Rabaul. Matsuda hears them pass overhead in formation, the sound of their engines gradually fading into distance. He understands now. The war is not being won by superior tactics or braver soldiers. It is being won by the nation that can build airfields in 3 weeks. Everything else is commentary. In military archives. There is a photograph taken from a Seabee bulldozer on some forgotten Pacific island in 1944. The operator's hands are visible on the controls, scarred and oil-stained. Through the frame of the cab, you can see jungle being pushed aside, trees falling, earth being reshaped. And in the background, blurred but unmistakable, other bulldozers, other machines. Other men in chambray blue, all moving forward together. Transforming wilderness into runway with the inexorable patience of glaciers and the speed of cavalry. That photograph contains no combat. No heroism in the traditional sense. Just work, just building. Just the quiet, relentless power of a nation that understood. Wars are not only won by those willing to die for their country, but by those capable of constructing their country's victory, 1 ton of steel and coral at a time. The Japanese defenders could not stop them, because stopping them would have required not defeating an army, but halting an idea, the idea that freedom's abundance, properly organized, becomes its own form of invincible force. You cannot shoot an idea. You cannot fortify against industrial capacity. You cannot outdie an enemy that does not need you to die, that simply needs you to be somewhere other than where the airfield is being built. The Seabees built that airfield anyway, and the next one. And the one after that. And through building, they advanced freedom across an ocean, not one battle at a time, but one runway at a time, until there was nowhere left to build, because the war was over, and the building had already won.